And welcome back, everybody, to a brand new edition of the Web of Wyrd. Now, for those of you that were listening in to Web of Wyrd before, I know it's been a wee while, probably about a year, in fact, since myself and my good friend Paul Stroke did our last episode. However, 2021 was a difficult year, I think, for many of us, myself and Paul included, and so the show had to be put on ice for a little while. But we're back, and I'm back with a new co-host, the one and only rocker, herbalist, all-round top guy, Pete Jackson Main. Welcome to the show, Pete.
Thanks, David. I'm delighted to be here. I mean, I've also very much missed the Web of Wyrd. I was one of your regular listeners, as you know. That's how we really kind of got to know each other. Although we sort of met previously at the plant consciousness stuff, but didn't think at that time that I'd end up actually being on the show. So I'm chuffed to bits, man.
Bless you, bro. Well, for those of our audience who did listen into the show when it was running back at the end of 2020, we featured a special song, Love in the Time of Coronavirus, which was written by Mr. Jackson Main. So you're already a celebrity, bro. You're out there in the public eye, you know?
Yeah, I know. And that was a weird one too, because, I was writing that song as a sort of very direct and personal response to the situation we found ourselves in at the time. And it came very interestingly, it sort of came to me in a dream, actually. And I woke up, I remember waking up one night, sitting up bolt upright with this tune and these words in my head. And it took me a few months to write it, but it was sort of unfolded as the story of the pandemic unfolded through all the sort of lockdowns into mask wearing, etc. The song kind of grew over those weeks, and by the time I actually finished it and recorded it, it seemed to be like a journey that we'd all taken. And although it was quite outspoken in many ways, it resonated with a lot of people, even people who I thought would probably dismiss it as being, conspiracy theory and all the rest of it. So it was a very interesting experience to get that out there. And it's available on all of the major music platforms now, including iTunes and Apple Music, etc.
Well, I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes, but yeah, as you rightly said, that was kind of how we started recommunicating again after a little bit of an absence from the plant consciousness events, which we were running up until a few years ago. But it's been really a joy to connect with you over the last year, Pete. And also you attended some of our training retreats as well towards the end of last year. But I think that the song, much as it was an earwig song, it definitely went around in my head for a little bit. I think it was highly appropriate, and God forbid that anybody would ever put you into the bracket of a conspiracy theorist. But I think there's different ways of sharing or expressing what's going on in our world, right? And of course, music is a great way to do that. But for those of our audience who don't know you, you're not on this show simply because you're an all-round top guy and a rocker. You're also a herbalist and an iridologist, right?
That's true. Yeah, I've been into natural medicine basically for most of my life. I found it very early on in my 20s, but I eventually trained as a medical herbalist about 30 years ago, and I've been practicing ever since. And I now also run, a top degree level education program in herbal medicine too. And iridology, yeah, it's a fascinating one. We must sort of hook up a little bit more on that. I got a book published about it, so I'm a kind of acknowledged authority on the subject. And this is where you look at the iris of the eye to identify health patterns, but so much more as well. And my personal path with that at the moment is leading right into emotional, psychological, and even potentially spiritual information that can be down the source as well.
Nice. And I have a copy of the book and I highly recommend it. It's very proficient. Yeah. It's available, I think, on all of the major online outlets. Or is there anywhere that people can get it from you directly, Pete, that I can put in the notes?
Yeah, I am actually the only UK outlet at the moment, because it's only printed in America, and I have to order copies from America in bulk, which is interesting because I also get to pay a lot of duty to HMRC on it. But it's I am planning to relaunch it under a sort of self-published title shortly, but it's a fair amount of work, so I haven't got it done yet. And the problem was that the UK publishers sold the book to the American publisher, without royalties. So I was cut off from the royalties. The only way I can get anything back from the book now is actually to buy copies at dirt cheap price from them and sell them to myself.
I'm sure in some
Which
way
works.
this kind of business arrangement is somewhat symptomatic of the world that we live in these days, right?
I think so, yeah.
So look, you know, that's by way of a little bit of an introduction, hopefully over the course of this show and future shows that we do together. All of these kind of this background of wisdom that you have, particularly around plants and plant medicine, which for me, you know, being a plant person, you know, I'm kind of in awe actually, Pete, of how many plants you know compared to how many plants I know. But, you know, we've kind of joined together a lot over this year and brought our worlds of sort of herbalism and plant medicine together with the sort of the plant spirit world. And, you know, we sort of really see now this upsurge in working in this way. And so, you know, the premise of this show is really the same as it always was when myself and Paul were doing it, which is to take a dialectic look at what's going on in our world. And there's a lot, right, you know, at the moment, but also to bring in sort of plants and solutions, and also to, you know, really highlight how we can work with the natural world through the, you know, the medicine wheel and the elements and all of these things. So in the great tradition it is Web of Wyrd, we're going to hopefully get dialectic on some of the topical issues that are circulating in our world right now, and then bring in some of our favorite plants with anecdotal stories and synchronicities and all kinds of other things from that space. So where do you think we should start this week, Pete? We were talking a bit off camera there, and lots of different stories to pick up on, but is there anything that you'd like to jump in with first?
I guess one of the things that's been on my mind a lot this past week is the necessity to get into that kind of state of non-duality as much as possible. What I mean by that is, as soon as you take up an adversarial stance of any kind, what you see going on, whether it's, you know, I hate Putin, or I don't trust the Ukrainians, or Zelensky, or you know, any of these figures that sort of put themselves up almost to be villainized. As soon as you get in, you fall into that trap. You polarize yourself into a very uncomfortable and fearful space. And I think, you know, you and I have talked a lot, and I heard you talk about this in your podcast with Pam Gregory as well, is that if you get into that space, then you're kind of already, you've lost the game, because you've lost your own peace of mind, you've lost your own, you've lost the frequency that you're trying to attain. And, you know, all of us, when I start to talk about frequency, you know, all of us want to be happy, all of us want to be feel safe, all of us want to be well nourished, well adjusted, have great relationships, and all the rest of it. Those are normal human things. And all of this stuff that's beamed at us is kind of trying to stop us doing that. It's disrupting it in very, very clear ways. And we couldn't have a clearer way in the pandemic. This is what my song was about partly as well, than the way that we were all sort of suddenly segregated, packed into our little boxes and told not to go out. And then, of course, later on wearing masks and all the rest of it. And it puts you into a state of fear. And now we've got Ukraine, and the similar thing is happening, you know, and people are falling for it, and they're getting rabid, they're ranting, and they're sort of really stupid things like, you know, going off to Ukraine and sort of, you know, joining as mercenaries and all of that sort of stuff. And, you know, that something else we could talk about. And it just kind of, it's almost like it stirs up the most insane behavior. And what's been coming to me is when I go out into, particularly if I go out into my garden, it's not a big garden. We live in the middle of a small city, Cambridge in the UK, and we have a you know, a bit more than the pocket handkerchief. We have a long, narrow garden. It's well big enough to have some plants in and grow a little bit of food actually as well. We go out there and the sun's shining, and I just look at the wormwood that's just coming up, and I say, hi, great to see you again, you know. And I think, well, what is there actually wrong with the world? You know, it comes at me as soon as I go outside, or if I turn on television, or even on the sort of social media feeds that I check into once in a while, like the addict that I am. But actually, when I'm actually out there or with myself and just thinking, I'm actually very happy. I can, you know, I can tune into bliss and happiness. And I'm just wondering, you know, what that means. If you can be happy and blissful in a world that is steadily going down the gurgler, so to speak, you know, what, why can't everybody do that? I guess that's my question. It's like, you know, I want to say to people, look, just, you know, have that attitude of gratitude. What have you got in your life? that's working. You know, if you've got a house, then give thanks for it. If you've got a partner, then give thanks for it. If you've got a job, give thanks for it. If you've got a garden, especially, you know, and if you haven't, then, you know, buy some pots and plant some stuff. You know, I'm doing some with students at the moment. I'm just saying, look, you know, you get no plants, don't. I do lectures and there's slides and all sorts of learning material. Get out there and grow some plants. That's my answer. I mean, I'm reminded of Voltaire, you know, il faut cultiver son jardin. You know, against all the woes of the world, we must cultivate our gardens.
Right, you know, I mean, you're already preaching to the converted here, bro. You know,
I know.
I spent most of this week with my hands in the dirt planting wormwood.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so for some of the audience out there, they'll know that I'm in Mexico right now, and for the first time, probably since I left Cymru, since I left Wales back in summer last year, I actually have a space now to plant things. And, you know, there was a moment this week where I really allowed myself to land properly for the first time when I surveyed the gardening that I'd done at my new place here, at this wonderful orchard in the mountains. And I put 60 wormwood plants in the ground. And, you know, literally from the first day I turned up here in the local town, wormwood presented herself to me on a stall, and she hasn't stopped presenting herself to me on every stall that I've seen since. So I'm super happy. You know, a bunch of local organic growers, all indigenous locals, have been growing wormwood, and I've been buying it from them. So they've kind of done the first bit of the work that I wasn't able to do, that I was stressing about a couple of months ago, you know, when I wasn't able to plant anything. No, someone's done that bit for me now. And so, you know, just to echo what you were saying, for me, you know, the last couple of weeks, the energy's been pretty heavy with the astrology, and maybe we can explore that through, you know, some of the other things you raised too. But to totally concur with what you're saying is, the time that I spend in the garden watering the plants and talking to my babies, to my wormwood plants, is when I feel most at home, and everything else is completely out of my awareness then, you know. And you know, you can feel good about that, right? Because you're growing medicine that you can use yourself, that will keep you safe, that you can give to your family members, to your friends, to your community. And so, you know, what better way to feel fulfilled than just be out in the sunshine, hands in the dirt, with plants that you love, with spirit beings that you work with every day. And wormwood is, you know, a spirit that I work with a lot. And I think you do too. And many of our students and friends also know wormwood. And it's just like, wow, you know. So when you're in those moments, you know, like you say, you're enjoying bliss. And so does the other stuff really exist? You know, it's what's that old saying that it's like, if a tree falls in the wood but nobody sees it or hear it, did it really happen?
Did it really happen? Yeah.
You know, and I'm working with this a lot right now up here where I am. It's like the frequency is so different from when I spend time talking to you on the phone or other friends in Britain and Europe. I'm like, wow, it feels like you guys are like in such a heavy frequency, you know. And it's no disrespect to you as individuals. It's just that that's what I feel in the collective of Britain, especially. It's this kind of almost like this heavy blanket that has to be dived down through in order to kind of energetically reach you guys again, which wasn't something I experienced before, but now is becoming harder. So, you know, and I kind of think to loop back to what you said at the beginning, really, you know, non-dualism is difficult for humans because we like to have these pantomime villains, right? The bad guy, the person that's doing something to me that's making my life miserable, because it's always somebody else's fault, right? It can never really be down to us. At least that's, you know, that's the dualistic approach. However, from a non-dual approach, we have to take responsibility for everything in our life and accept that we are doing it all to ourselves. Right. And that's a pretty uncomfortable thought, you know, and this is something that came to me last year at one point when I was chatting with my colleagues upstairs in the higher realms. And they were just like, dude, you do realize that everything that's going on for you right now is just you doing it to you.
Yeah.
And I was just like, no,
totally.
surely that dude who's been screwing me around the last few weeks, it's him, man. It's that mofo, man. It's him doing it to me. And they're like, well, it kind of is, but you're letting him do it to you. Oh man, why am I doing that? Good question, dude. That's why we're putting this on your table right now, is to have a look at this and ask yourself this question: why are you doing this to yourself? Right. So, you know, once you start to get to that place and you start to look at life through that filter, you start to see things a little differently, right?
Absolutely. And that you know, it comes down to, I think, our fundamental beliefs about reality, which a lot of the time we don't even question, because you know, we talk about reality as though it's a fact without actually realizing that we're creating it. You know, take that step, or maybe a few steps backwards away, you know, backwards inside or behind yourself or wherever, stand apart and get some sense of objectivity, and the whole thing can change very quickly. And I think that's the message, isn't it, really? And it's a very, very difficult, I mean, you've got it right on the nail there, Davyd. I think it's that taking responsibility. And it may be like, you know, you want to say, you want to scream at the world, it's not fair, it's not my fault, you know, these people are rotters. But if you don't take responsibility, you don't get anywhere, you don't get better, you don't solve anything. Taking responsibility is empowerment. It's saying, right, okay, I created this stuff, I can uncreate it.
Right. You know, and I think that there's lots of aspects within this, of course. You know, there are variables, if you believe in reincarnation and karma, that, you know, that maybe we're picking up pieces from other lives, but all of those, even if they're past lives, they're still somehow resonating in the present moment. So they're still kind of in the present moment, right? But, you know, you used the word there, which I think is one that is increasingly suspect, which is facts. People love to tell you the facts according to them. Right, you know, the guy over there, his facts are going to be different from mine, and they're certainly going to be different from the facts on BBC or any other MSM right now. And, you know, people love to lay out the facts, but we live in a time when the facts and the truth are increasingly hard to get at, right? And, you know, even me and you, we can agree on 99% of things, but we might witness something, right? And have a slightly different version of the story. You know, I often use the example of a car crash. On a junction, 3 people witness it, they have to give a statement. They all believe they saw the reality of the situation, but all of their accounts are slightly different. So which one is the truth, right? You know, that's just a very simple kind of example, but if you roll it out to life in general, wow, how can you be sure of anything, right?
Yeah, and actually it comes to me that the word fact comes from a Latin word which means to make, facere. And so that really says it all. You know, facts, you know, to see them as absolute is ridiculous, because it's just stuff that someone has made. And, you know, and I think everything we see, everything we experience is a collective creation, illusion, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can think our way out of it. But as soon as we set up something that cannot be somehow questioned or deconstructed or critiqued, which is a lot of what's being at the moment with all the censorship and stuff that's going on. As soon as we set up these sort of sacred cows that can't be gainsaid, then we're lost. We're trapped completely. And I actually do think that this is part of what we're being called upon to see. And I think the unseen worlds, if I can call them that, and the sort of thing that I mean, you rightly point out that I know a lot more plants than you do, but I think the plants that you know, you taught me in a lot more depth than I knew them previously. And as I've opened that up, what's come to me also is that there's a whole host of beings, entities, whatever, out there who are actually rooting for us, who are willing us to get this right. And that, I think, is a really, really important perspective to have, because otherwise I think we can sort of get to feel that history is this kind of unrelenting march into chaos, catastrophe, disaster. Even stories about stuff that you might read, and I know you and I have read about certain historical events in the far distant past of the human race, like ancient Egypt and Atlantis, that ended badly. You know, there's this expectation that we're going to blow it. But actually, does it have to be like that? I think that there's a lot going for us at the moment, and sure, you know, we've talked about this as well. Maybe it's not for everybody, but there are enough of us now, I think, who want something different and are prepared to go the extra mile for that. And I think, you know, the plant spirits, that the plant entities are just becoming so important. I mean, that was a floodgate that opened up those 4 days that we spent with you in Somerset were just, you know, kind of mind-blowing, actually, in a very gentle and supportive way.
I don't know, man, the tobacco didn't look that gentle for you.
That wasn't gentle, no.
I look pretty full on, man. I think that's the quietest I've ever seen you for an extended period of time. Someone just slapped
yeah. Well, I've had a few episodes like that where you haven't been present, but yeah, that does happen.
Oh man. Well, look, you know, so many things just to pick up on there, but again, just want to loop back to this idea of the facts, right? Because I think what you just said there, you know, about the Latin expression of that is sort of, you know, it's making up the facts almost, right? And it reminds me of something that we heard a lot of at the beginning of this process, that was held up as the irrefutable fact, which was follow the science, right? And this is something we're often told, the science, follow the science. But when you really take a step back from science, and there's no reflection in a bad way on science anyway, but it's like science is consistently proving itself to be wrong all the time. So that's great. We want that kind of exploratory approach to things, but to hold that up as the be all and the end all that we have as our incontrovertible truth, to me seems like a foolish idea, because if something that proves itself to be folly consistently is being held up as the ultimate truth, we're going to get ourselves into a bit of a mess, right?
Yeah, completely. And one of the one of the sort of the most important ideas in real science at the moment is I don't know if you're aware of this or whether our listeners are, but Popper's principle of falsifiability, which is where if something's there that seems to be a fact, you do everything you possibly can to try to disprove it. And that's the way that if it withstands that, then you can trust it to a certain extent, but you can never trust it 100%, because one day somebody is going to come along and disprove it. And this happens again and again and again with science. So I think that the move to sort of create an absolute with science falls into the same category as stuff we've already talked about with reality in general. It seems to be linked to an agenda and a set of vested interests, if I can call it that, that are actually profiting, not just financially, but in other ways, in terms of power as well, from the people who've bought it. That's a deeply worrying thought. But it is a thought that I've been having for many, many years. I mean, when I first trained as a herbalist, it was in the context, I was training some pretty hardcore people in America. One of them in particular, who got himself, basically had to stop practicing because the FDA were going to throw him into jail and not let him out ever. And he just had a kid, so he voluntarily agreed not to practice anymore, because he was out there telling people, basically, to cure themselves from cancer. Very, very difficult subject to broach, that one, especially if you start talking about herbs and natural medicine and stuff, because the first charge that comes at you is you're preventing people from getting proper treatment, etc. And I work with a lot of cancer patients, and they're doing their chemo and their radio, and they're doing the herbs alongside it, and the herbs are actually helping them to get a better result than they would on the radio and chemo itself. But the whole underlying narrative of that was that cancer is a massive business, and they don't want people coming along and curing people with plants and food and earth and stuff like that. They want to sell the drugs, and we might be entering difficult territory here. So stop me if you don't want to go there. No. But the radicalness of herbal medicine, for me, it wasn't just ersatz drugs. It wasn't just, I don't like these drugs, they're not natural, I'll use herbs instead because they're natural. It was the power of the natural world to heal us is far, far greater than we have given it for. And I think that we are in the present. When I started this was very interesting for me. When I sort of got into natural medicine, it was way back in the 70s actually, when I had my first encounter. And when I found it, I was like, wow, this is the medicine of the future. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to learn about, because it's the answer to a lot of things I've been wondering about, particularly in my own health, which wasn't too good in my 20s.
So it wasn't down to your lifestyle at that age by any chance, was it?
Well, never let it be said. Yeah, it was to do with 3 years at university doing all sorts. Yeah, that's all right. But I thought I was looking at a world that would gradually continue to embrace what I thought was important. And there's been, especially in the last couple of years, such a backlash. I was taken off YouTube for promoting elderberry for dealing with COVID. And also not just elderberry, but loads of stuff as well, we transgressed YouTube's community standards, because this is not just me, it was people that I work with in the college that I work for, and they were basically taking everybody down. I mean, doctors, scientists who are coming out and saying that there are other things that we all know about, the ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine stuff, but there were lots of herbs involved in that as well. I mean, we were getting information on herbs out from Wuhan within a week or so of the pandemic being declared. So it was already obvious to me that the plant world had a lot to offer us. And interestingly enough, that hasn't stopped. And I'm still using the same plants now as I did then. A lot of wormwood for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so many things just to say there. I mean, I talked about this on the video pan this week. And as somebody put in the comments, that it seems like a radical idea, but it shouldn't be really. Is that the person who knows most about our health is us more than anybody else?
Yeah.
But we've been convinced or coached to believing that a big business industry that really profits from us being sick, and I think we have to start acknowledging that is something that's been going on. We've been kept in a place of sickness for a long time, many of us, or our society in general. And as you said, I don't think there are any pharmaceutical substances out there that work that don't have a basis in plant medicine. So ultimately, everything that Big Pharma is producing, and a great book that I recommend everybody to read is The Green Pharmacy by Barbara Griggs. That book really shows you the subversion of plant medicine since the time of the Romans, and what a concerted effort it's been over the last 1500 years to remove us away from empowering self-healing mechanisms with nature into quackery. I mean, it's the science of the Middle Ages was basically, mercury, and then in the Victorian age we get into laudanum and all of this kind of stuff. So, being given by, the scientists, these so-called respectable people of the time, these kind of quackery ideas that were considered to be, the ultimate truth at that time. But of course, in the end, particularly in the Victorian period, with all of the metals, put a lot of people into Bedlam, into the lunatic asylum. And the parallels for me with that period in time, which was 200 years ago, and for those people that follow the astrology, you might be able to draw some links there. There is a pattern that happens every 200 years to humans that seems to follow a similar kind of trajectory, which you can go away and research yourself. But it's like, ultimately, we are seen as business by the health industry, and that is the ultimate disempowering tool, I think, for all of us, when we consider, like I talked about on the video of Pam, we can go out and pick dandelion, which is a plant I know that you know really well and I'd like to talk a little bit more about, but it just grows outside of our front door. And this is one of the most badass, powerful plant medicines on the planet right now. And it's just like, that the thought from the point of view of big business that we can go outside of our front door and pick a plant out of the crack in our sort of, our crazy paving tiles or whatever in our garden, and that's going to help release all of these heavy metals from our liver. Of course, from a business point of view, they don't want you to know that, because they'll be out of business by next week if we all do that. And so this is the illusory part of the game, let's call it the game, right, that is duality, the 3D reality, where we get duped, I believe, into accepting these things, into allowing to believe these things of ourselves. And as I've said before on other interviews, the realization that I'm allowing myself to be sick was a profound one, because then I started asking myself, why am I doing this? Why am I allowing myself to be sick? Because from a 5D perspective, it's not real. So why am I allowing myself in the 3 and 4D to experience all of this? Well, from one point of view, it's growth. It's really through suffering and difficult challenges that we grow as beings. So that's okay. So sometimes maybe my higher self allows me to be sick, but other times, I'm allowing myself to be sick because maybe I'm in a place of victimhood, and it's part of my identity to always be sick, for example. I'm sure as healers and herbalists, we've come across people in that position before. So, it's really important, to, as you said, to start acknowledging the unseen world, the quantum world, let's call it that, right? The quantum world that is around us, particularly with these incredible bodhisattva beings, the plants, who give us the medicines, and to realize that these beings want to teach us not how to go to somebody else and ask for their assistance, but to teach us how we can do it for ourselves. I mean, what a revelation, right? What a radical idea that is. Really, truly a radical idea that we can be self-empowered enough to look after ourselves. Wow.
That's totally true. And the guy I mentioned, one of the guys I trained with, he used to say, he had a saying, I heard him say it several times. By the way, he appears in Barbara's book. You mentioned Barbara Griggs. Just want to say, Barbara's a good friend of mine as well. And sadly, she died a few months ago. I don't know whether you knew that. But she was a big friend of the herbal community in the UK. and a personal supporter of mine when I wrote my book. She was very kind enough to ring me up and congratulate me. So a big loss actually to us, Barbara, but I'm sure she's doing good work on the other side. But she wrote about this guy because he was very important at the time she was updating Green Pharmacy. He had just been to the UK and was doing a lot of work over here, and I was sort of one of his acolytes and students. And he had a saying which was, you know, my ultimate ideal. By the way, he lived in California. That's where he hung out. And my ultimate ideal is to teach everybody the means of self-regulating healthcare, and then, you know, we can all just go down to the beach and party, you know, because if we're all well and we know how to keep ourselves well, nobody needs to run doctors and clinics and all of that stuff. We just don't need it. And that's what nature can help us do. So yeah, powerful ideas, very radical.
Wow, I had no idea about Barbara. That's really sad. And like you, you know, what wonderful, wonderful lady. She spoke at one of our plant
Yes,
conferences.
she did. Yes, I remember seeing her there.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful presentations. We had plenty at Plant Consciousness over the years, but really wonderful individual. And I'm really sad I didn't know that. So maybe this show is in dedication to a wonderful lady who really, really put plant medicine at the forefront of everything that she did. And if you haven't read The Green Pharmacy, I really would go out and get a copy of it, because it, in many ways, it's a commentary on where we've got to right now, actually, and how we've got here. And you know, yeah, I mean, we're also on this Virgo Pisces full moon from a few days ago, right? Which is all about this, you know, that's the health axis in the zodiac. So we're at a point, and as wonderful erudite people like Pam have been pointing out for a long time, that, you know, we're at a point where health and our personal responsibility to our health and society in general is really under the spotlight. And I love what you just said, because in that kind of world, and that's the world that I am advocating and I'm moving into, is that if I'm not sick, then I've got more time to concentrate on being creative and playful. And, you know, if we remove the element of sickness from our bodies and thus from our society over time, then we have more time to come up with creative ideas about how to maybe clean the plastic out of the oceans, or all of these kinds of other blights that we've got, because we're not stressed, we're not sick, we've got all of this creative playtime now to get kind of creative with. And of course, there are plants out there that are great for this. Plants like Santa Maria are perfect for that unconditional love, creative goddess energy, you know, that really can open up your mindset and allow you to think creatively, if you're not stressed to high heaven by the life that's being pushed on you, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's kind of a parallel process too. You know, you talked about cleaning plastic out of the oceans. We've got to clean the plastic out of ourselves, and the metal and all the other stuff that's, you know, clogging up the meridians and the energy pathways within our body. I mean, I do in my work, and this is basically the school I studied in, and my teacher that I was just talking about, you know, 90% of it is actually based on detoxification of some kind, because we're all toxic. And you mentioned a while back about, you know, looking at us on the plains of Europe in this kind of horrible kind of dense atmosphere, and I feel it, man. I really feel it. I was saying to somebody today, another contact of mine who's an energy healer, and I said, I feel, we were talking about the virus because we both sort of had an encounter with COVID recently, and I said, I actually feel as though I'm living in a viral soup. And it's kind of on different levels. It's not just sort of, you know, having a respiratory tract complaint or something like that. It's just feeling really, I don't know, just like fighting your way through stuff. I could easily be a recluse at the moment, not because I don't like people. I do. I love people, and I'm just sort of very committed and passionate about what happens to them. But being near so many of them, because the world's very crowded, especially in places like, go out and get anything, go downtown, go to the supermarket, it's not just a few people knocking around, it's crowds, it's hundreds. And I'm just noticing that more and more, and noticing how the density of the atmosphere, and it, you know, viral affectations, I don't think are just about health on the physical level too. I think there are mind viruses, and there are emotional viruses that we catch, and that can sort of hop on to us through being in that kind of circumstance. And it really does feel as though, and I think this is coming to focus for me since doing the work with you and Emma, that I'm much more conscious of this than I ever was. I had moments in the past. I remember once being in Tesco, and thinking, I just don't like it here. The light's not right. The stuff on the shelves is not right. The people are not right. Get me out of here. And that was about 40 years ago. And you kind of shut some of that stuff down because of the necessity to notice it again now. So that's really where, for me, the plants come in, because they offer me a reality that's very, very different from all of that. And I'm privileged to be working with plants. So we're talking about dandelion and detoxification, because that's really basically the path that we're on. Detoxification is just a massive part of the way I work, and dandelion is always in there. And detoxification can come into play in so many different scenarios. Health-wise, it's not just about the digestion and the bowel. It's also about your hormones. It's about your cardiovascular system, your bloodstream, your nervous system. Everything is affected. And anytime there's a need to sort of scrape out, I call it scraping out, or the Chinese call it dredging. They call them dandelions a liver dredger. So you think about that concept of dredging, all the silt that's built up over months and years and possibly even decades. Dandelion will get that out, and it will turn things around really quickly. And people sort of working with hormonal complaints, for example, will choose a herb like Dong Quai, Angelica species, Angelica sinensis, and they'll sort of expect that to do the job. Partner that with dandelion, and you've got a real dynamic duo, because Dong Quai will sort your hormones out. It's a blood nourisher, blood builder, etc., etc. It's a lovely plant. But dandelion just comes out and says, right, you'd be better off if you didn't have this lot in you. And it just, by clearing the liver out, all of the hormones start to come into balance very, very quickly. I just love that way of working, of that sort of understanding. And then I sort of think about, what dandelion might be doing for us, detoxing on other levels, and my mind is blown. I mean, dandelion has so much else going for it as well. What you bring forward about dandelion, the Time Lord, and the it's all about timing and so I did tell you this. I think dandelion came into my life very powerfully a couple of weeks or so ago, when I was phoned up by a team of obstetricians at a major London hospital, saying that they were puzzled because I'd managed to cure one of their patients of something called obstetric cholestasis, which is a liver problem that you get when you're pregnant, or some women get when they're pregnant, and they couldn't understand it because they've got nothing that will cure it. And so they wanted to know how I'd done it, and I might be involved in setting up a clinical trial with them to sort of take that further, which is an interesting thought.
Wow. I mean, yes, you shared that story with me personally, and I was hoping to do a special piece with you, and we still may a sort of more extended piece about the use of dandelion and also this, because there's so much in it. And dandelion is one of those plants that that is been a part of human consciousness, I would say, for a very long time, and so there's a very deep connection with the spirit of humans. But yeah, I had to laugh when you talked about Tesco's, Mel. I think we've all had that Tesco's moment. I certainly had a lot of them at university. The lights were incredibly bright and white in Tesco's always, and there was just a slightly edgy atmosphere in there that used to give me the heebie-jeebies. And 20 years on, nothing much had changed when I left Wales. Tesco's was still giving me.
It's true.
But for different reasons. But yeah, this what you said about the sludge and the soup, I can definitely concur with that. I mean, I'm blessed enough now to be up in the rarefied air of the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico. But when I descend from my eagled perch down into the soup of the cities of Guadalajara or Morelia, as I had to do this week, I'm much more aware of the thickness of the energy. And I certainly noticed it yesterday. Yesterday was actually the end of a 3-day festival in the state of Michoacan, where I live, and it was very busy. We went to some sacred sites yesterday with some friends, and it was incredibly busy. And I went from feeling, really, really upbeat and great, and in a good, energetic frame of mind, to, after having spent a couple of hours in a fairly heavily populated tourist area, to feeling completely drained and wiped out, and actually just really needing to rest. And comparatively speaking, I feel that the energy in that regard out here is a lot less thick than it is in say Britain. But yeah, as you start to become more self-aware of your own energy, and the plants are really helpful with this, as you so rightly said, Pete, you start to become more aware of the energy around you and how it's affecting you. And I think that this is a really big part of where we're at right now. And yeah, as an energy healer, the one thing that I always have to try and share with people is that what we see in the 3D is the end manifestation of something that began as an energetic output. an idea, a dream, an impulse, whatever. And somehow when the energetic, it's like when we set intentions, right? For the, for the new moons and the equinoxes and the solstices, we kind of have this intention for something to happen. And if we allow ourselves to be in the flow, spirit will bring it to us in the most appropriate ways for us, but it might not necessarily be kind of what we originally envisaged, right? And the same is true with all sorts of things, what we see manifesting as something that we are told is a viral condition, technically, as far as I understand it, is something that scientists have still not even proven to be actually a thing. As somebody was telling me recently, scientists can't actually prove the existence of viruses from that perspective. So I find that interesting.
I've been chasing this, I've been chasing that one around actually, and I've got something, just by the by, just a note from me to you here. I've got something which somebody sent me just the other day that I've not looked into yet, but I don't actually think it's out yet, but it is really chasing down that story about viruses and what they are. And we mentioned earlier that what's truth in science. One era is completely debunked at another era, and I see the same around viruses. We're going to see somebody's going to come up with a what's the word when you want to disprove something, a denunciation, not quite the right word, but when you actually come up with an idea that completely debunks what went before, this is going to happen around the viral thing. There are already people working on it. One of the guys that I know is working on it is Dr. Tom Cowan, the Australian doctor. I don't know whether you checked in with any of his stuff. He was very active around the early stages of the pandemic, basically saying to people, well, you're all scared of something that doesn't exist. You're scared of a unicorn. You know what I mean? It was, and I think this might actually be emanating from him actually, because the person who sent it to me is quite keen on him. But I'm looking forward to seeing that one, and maybe when that breaks, that's another thing we can maybe have a look at.
Totally. I mean, I think this is super interesting, and this is what we try to do on this show, right? Is be dialectic about things going on in our world without necessarily saying it's this or that, because I'm in a very open space right now. All I can talk about is from my own direct experience. And like Tom Cowan from day one, I didn't buy into this idea of a global virus, and so it's never affected me. However, I can say that I've encountered the energy or the intelligence of something that presented itself as CV19. It didn't present itself as a virus, it presented itself as something very, very different to that. But being a shaman, an energy person, and working a lot in that way, that's what I'm saying. What came into my system and tried to convince me that I should accept it into my system, I revoked and actually removed. It tried 3 times over the last 18 months to convince me that I should accept it. And I said, no, I don't want to. So for me, it wasn't a reality, but I could see that it was a reality for other people because they'd accepted it. Then this prompted me to do a detox, as I've shared before, because I got diagnosed finally at this point in my life with having had Epstein-Barr virus active since I was a kid, which finally explained all of the body pains I've had since a teenager. I haven't had a single day in my adult life where I haven't had body pain of some description. So I know that this is something a lot of people suffer with: brain fog, chronic fatigue, etc., etc. So as I've shared before in other interviews, I journeyed to meet the spirit of Epstein-Barr virus, and he presented himself to me as this Celtic ancestor as part of my immune system. And he said, I only get activated when I'm trying to tell you that your body is overly toxified with metals. That's my job. I'm part of your immune system. I'm your friend. And it felt completely like that. There was no malevolence to it. So I'm like, okay, so this thing that's Epstein-Barr virus, is not transmissible from what I can see. And actually, these things that we're being told that could be what classically are called viruses actually could be something else altogether, that in my mind, in the way that I've experienced it, is energy. It's a type of energy that has an impression or a message within it that we either accept or we don't accept. And I know that you decided to finally accept the invitation from CV19 recently, consciously somewhat. And I don't know if you want to share your experience, but I think it's fascinating. Please do share if you're open to it, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. And I was sort of, it was very interesting because I was kind of in a space where I was saying to myself, it's very odd, it's been around for 2 years and I haven't had it. And because of all the stuff that I do, taking herbs and occasional, fairly regular detoxing and stuff like that, not that I'm a saint, I'm not. But I take care of myself. And for me, the most important thing actually is my attitude. If my attitude is right, if my mind and my emotions are right, then my body is fine. I know that. And it was bang banging on my door. It was like, come on, you need to experience this. You need to know what, you know, because I treat a lot of people with COVID.
Right.
I mean, lots, massive, especially since all the medications, the injectables have come out. I've treated masses of people for COVID, usually people who have been injected as well, or people who've been close to them. And so I was kind of on the point of yeah, all right, well, I would be quite interested, and also interested to know whether my immune system was up to it. So yeah, I got it, and it floored me, I don't mind saying. But as I went down, I thought, this is going to be cool. Now, probably a lot of people out there think I'm completely bonkers at this stage, but I thought, no, I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be great. And I got all these messages. I had to I couldn't go to work, obviously, so I had to sort of call in sick and tell my students and everybody, you know, and arrange cover for myself and all of that. That was interesting, because I felt as though I was going up on some kind of psychedelic experience, to be honest with you. And I just remember lying
psychedelic experience. You're going to encourage lots of people who've not had it to go out there and have it.
I know,
some kind of crazy trick.
I know, maybe.
Anyway, continue, man.
And anyway, it knocked me out for about, it kind of floored me for about 3 days, and I was just lying. We've got a sofa bed in our sitting room, so we just basically, both of us had it, by the way, and we basically just flattened it, so we got it out so that we could lie down rather than having to sit up, and we just kind of, it was just like lay there and moaned for about 3 days, you know. But I was while I did journey with it, actually, I did decide to follow it and have a conversation with it, which I think I told you about. That was very interesting.
Yeah,
got some very interesting messages, very personal messages from that as well. But also, but the main impression I had of it was that it was there to help me. That it was some kind of immune modulation or upgrade. That I think one of the messages was something which I was completely delirious about the time. It just went do when you're in that state, and it was like, I've come to give you options. You know, I just kind of turned that one over in my head a few times and thought, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. But the interesting thing was, as I came out of it, I sort of thought, wow, that was amazing, that was interesting. And all these people, you know, when I eventually hooked up with social media and emails and stuff like that, everybody was sort of commiserating with me and, oh, I hope you're feeling better. And I just said, I've never felt better. I felt great. You know, I mean, my body was aching. My back particularly was just killing me. My head was banging. My ears were shrieking. I was coughing. My throat was full of phlegm. But despite all of that, I was actually fine. Do you know what I mean? How can you be? This is an interesting question. I go through this with my students a lot, because there's a lot of judgments about being ill. And, you know, one of my sort of major tenets is you can be ill, but you can still be well. In other words, what I said to people was, actually, I'm fine because my immune system is handling this. And I knew it was. That's the sum of it, really. I'm sort of interested in the idea. Maybe I didn't have to invite it in, you know, maybe I didn't have to have that demonstration. But I'm actually glad I did. It produced a good many important insights, and it convinced me that my immune system, you know, I'm an old bloke now, David, you know. I've got shall we say I'm nearer to the 7-0 than I am to the 6-0 now. So I'm in the high risk category. You know, I still get calls from the National Health Service asking me, are you sure you don't want the jab? Which I never answer.
I mean, you could be in a high risk category, bro, just not with your health.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think it's really cool what you're sharing, though, because to me this is an interesting exercise. When you get shamanic on something and you flip it so that you're not a victim in the process, but you've entered it somewhat consciously. I mean, I kind of also had the energy of it pass through my system temporarily enough to know what it was and go, I don't think I need that, thank you. I've had plenty of other immune system upgrades over the last 12 years of all of the plant medicine I put into my body. So my body is already naturally attuned to transformation. You know, you don't get to have 4 planets in Scorpio and not be pretty good at transforming energies, you know, but it's kind of, I think this idea of consciously allowing something in that you knew was going to hurt, but you basically were in a dialogue, as I understand it, with an intelligence that was telling you what was going on, why it was going to hurt, showing you things potentially in your body where there might be underlying conditions that needed to be looked at, right? So that's, when you think about it like that, that's, thank you very much, CV19, for showing me where I need to do my homework, right?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, it was also a revisitation, because I had a very bad virus. Sharing virus stories now. The last flu that I had basically was swine flu back in 2011.
Right.
And that left me with some serious problems that never really went away, because I didn't understand it at the time, and I was into plant medicine and all the stuff, but I was not, even at that time, I was not kind of, on the same level as I am with it now. It was just annoying to be, it took me out for 3 weeks. It was much worse actually than COVID in many ways. But it was like a revisiting, and it did actually show me the areas which didn't get better after the swine flu, I traveled into and was able to see, as a direct result of that experience, say what that was all about. And I know, by the way, that I also harbor Epstein-Barr virus, just like you. And I saw that very clearly in that experience as well.
Right. And this is the thing, it's kind of a lot of this, I think, that we're moving into right now in terms of health and self-empowerment and responsibility is this kind of self-awareness, right? And either accepting, yourself and people like me as healers, we often have to accept illness into our body so that we can get it down as a resonance or a frequency so that we can understand it. And so then we can help other people. But this is kind of where being a healer or a shaman can be tricky sometimes, is that we have to allow the sickness to pass through our system so we know it, but we can't allow ourselves to get sick from it, because if we do, then we can't do our job, right? And so I find it interesting that, your story of the swine flu and then of CV is just like, and even with me with Epstein-Barr, I mean, I've had that my entire adult life, as in fact I think have the vast majority of all Europeans. In fact, my good friend Rebecca O'Reilly, who I highly recommend people checking out, who specializes in so-called viral conditions and heavy metal detoxification processes, she was telling me that something like 90 to 95% of all Westerners have activated Epstein-Barr virus and don't even know it. Right. So, these are the underlying conditions that we have been living with, really, I think, strongly since the Industrial Revolution, because heavy metal toxification is something that can give, for example, this is something I found out recently, children who have eczema, right? I asked Rebecca about why that would be, and she said, well, because the mother was heavily toxified with heavy metals. And so it's just passed generation to generation through the womb. And it has been since our ancestors worked in the coal pits and the iron forges and all of those places where heavy metal particles were flying everywhere and being breathed in, right? You've only got to go back to some of our grandparents' generation to find, particularly from up north, from all of the coal mines, the effects of people breathing in these kinds of substances. So we're also at a time when, things can get mashed up in the explanation. So we've heard a lot about viral shedding. Well, I don't believe that viruses can be transmitted, not from what I've seen energetically, but what I have seen is that there are plenty of other things that are being shed, particularly after the experimental injections have gone in, that could be seen as viral shedding. But, if we consider that CV19 was really never a contagion, but was actually an energetic message that you either received in or didn't. And if you received in, you then had the choice or the option to communicate with, and from what you said before, one of the choices you got was either death or wellness or an upgrade. And I've heard plenty of people, spiritual people, who've been absolutely smacked over the head with CV, but felt afterwards so much better. They felt like they'd had an upgrade, so this is kind of where we're sort of looping back to the beginning of the conversation nicely, as I hope we will continue to in future conversations, this idea of non-duality and seeing things not necessarily as like, oh my God, like, that's really dangerous, like, but actually going, hold on a second, maybe there's something here for me, something beneficial, maybe not. I really checked in with my guides and my crew to see whether I needed to have the illness or to have experimental injections put into me. And they said, no, it's really not, it's not necessary for you. And you don't need to do that. I would have, as a shaman, as a tantric person, I'm always open to all possibilities. I work a lot with poisons, poisonous plants. I'm very good at transforming poisons in my body. So I feel comfortable enough to be able to deal with these things. I wouldn't recommend it to other people, but that's my trajectory. And I have to listen to how my higher self talks to me through my body explains things to me through my body, and that is my sole source of absolute truth, because it's me. I can listen to what you're saying and go, yeah, I completely agree with 99.9% of what Pete, is telling me, because he's a good guy and I trust him. But ultimately, for me, the ultimate source of my own truth has got to be me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's exciting about this whole thing as well, is that, too many people really kind of expect other people to be just like them, or to be able to manipulate them into doing what they want. And isn't it just amazing when you can look at each other and say, wow, man, your truth is amazing, but it's not my truth,
Right.
and celebrate both.
Yes.
So yeah.
That is more exciting, isn't it? It's more creative and it's more
Yeah.
respectful. It's just like, because then once those barriers go down, we can find actually that we really do agree with lots of people around us all the time. If we remove the need to be fixed in our facts or our truth, which actually mostly, by the way, for most people are secondhand because they've got them from somewhere else. And it's just like, if we can come to a place of wisdom sharing, not knowledge sharing, because knowledge is something you can get off the telly, right? But wisdom is direct experience, is something you can say, well, this happened to me and it might happen to you differently, but I'm sharing it because you might find it useful in case something similar comes up for you, right? That's it.
Yeah.
Nothing more, or nothing less. I'm not telling you that it's going to be like that or this is going to happen, or it could be the same for you. We're exchanging stories in this case about something called CV19. We both had experiences of it, both shamanically worked with it, and have come out with different, but different conclusions that somehow are compatible with each other. And maybe we can share some of this and it might help some of the viewers out there. And, that's, I think, where we're headed to, right, is be secure in our own truth without needing to manipulate it on to other people and force them to accept it.
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes. I'd like to introduce another plant, which might seem a little bit random, but I'm going to get you to dangle it in now. Maybe we'll pick it up again next week. And that plant is horsetail. I'd love you to throw out a few little cryptic bits and pieces that you've discovered about horsetail, Pete.
Yeah, things got a little bit conflated within the last few weeks because of the COVID experience. I did also have a nice little experience with some fungi at one stage, in which horsetail presented itself to me. It's a herb I was interested in because of a particular personal issue, which you don't need to know about, which it sorted out quite nicely, actually. So horsetail is a very, very ancient plant. It comes from a phyla, as we call it. It's a genetic category, which is much, much older than most of the other plants on the planet. It comes from the Equiseta phyta. And so you can sort of tell that when you look at it, because it's kind of weird. When I first encountered horsetail, I thought it was incredibly toxic because it just looked so weird. And it's an interesting one because it has a sort of dual aspect too, because it has a seed head or flower of sort, not really a flower because it's before the days of flowers, evolutionarily speaking, but it has this weird spike. It looks a bit like an asparagus, and then that's one part of the plant that goes away, and I've never managed to catch the moment when it disappears and is replaced by the leaf formation, which is the true horsetail, which is kind of feathery, very bright green, feathery kind of sprout that comes up, and it can grow to about 1.5 feet tall. You have to be a bit careful with it because there's a bigger variety of it that grows here called palustris, which is actually a little bit toxic, but horsetail is okay. Lots of stories about horsetail being able to cure cancer, particularly from the European perspective. It's generally regarded as a plant that is specific to the urinary system. It's a good bladder astringent, so it's good for sort of incontinence, stress incontinence, prostate problems, particularly in men, and that sort of thing. It's a strengthening herb. It's a vulnerary herb. It supplies of calcium, actually, for the rebuilding of tissues, and it does so by providing a form of silicon which is easily converted by the body into calcium. So we put it into one of our formulae that's called bone, flesh and cartilage, and this is a formula that we give a sort of nourishing formula for the musculoskeletal system, particularly. So it gives a sort of a blast of herbal nutrients that the musculoskeletal system can use to build healthy and strong ligaments, bones, muscles, etc. So it's got that going for it. But when I sort of encountered it recently, and I thought, because I wanted to work with it, and I thought, rather than just sort of, as I would have done in the past, just quaff a load of horsetail tincture, or mix up a broth or something. I thought, okay, I'm gonna have a word first, just to see if Horsetail will listen to me, if he'll talk to me. And he did, and it was quite amazing. The first thing that happened was that he presented himself as a kind of a rainbow warrior. And when I use that phrase, I'm aware that there are sort of connotations there, but the horsetail itself, the plant, was rainbow colored. And it was really kind of a martial experience. He was really telling me that he's a force to be reckoned with. And I said, okay, I established that he could actually help me. I'm saying he, it was definitely presented as a male. I know gender doesn't necessarily apply in these cases, but that's how it struck me. And I said, what can you do? How do you do what you do? And the message, which I've been puzzling over ever since, but I think has so many layers to it, is I become what I want to destroy. And this is kind of interesting because it helps the body to build hard tissues, but it also helps the body to break down hard tissues. We're talking about things that you don't need, like bony spurs in arthritis and cancer and cysts and tumors of one sort or another. And also, it is one of those plants that grows in places a bit like, when we were talking about in the training, we were talking about fireweed and repatterning environments. It has a similar kind of feel. It likes those desolate waste spaces where where not many other plants will consent to grow, and it seems to thrive in those areas. And I just thought also with Horsetail about detoxification as well, and I'm very, very interested in the idea. And this is something, again, we probably for a future talk, in the idea of it being high in silicon in particular, because silicon is an interesting one. Homeopathically, silica takes out things you don't want. So if you want to extract something, including heavy metals from the body, we go with homeopathic or tissue salts. Homeopathic tissue salts, we use silica. And this idea of being able to break down and take out things that you don't want in you is a really, really powerful part of what I think Horsetail is about. But it also struck me, of course, that we are living, in a world defined by what is sort of popularly called Silicon Valley. Our whole life, our lives and our whole culture at the moment is ruled by silicon, in the sense that that's what they make computer chips out of. And I just kind of thought there's a resonance there that I haven't fully been into. Maybe you can help with that, Davyd. I'm just at the sort of front end of exploring that one. But interestingly, I have another thing going on. I was talking to somebody about this today too. Since that moment of encountering Horsetail, I've not taken it, which is really interesting, because I keep asking myself, well, why didn't you go forward and take it? And the answer that came back was, you don't really need to. And I'm finding this a lot with plants at the moment, that I can take them, or I can take the essence, or I can take this, or I can simply be with them. And it seems to be sometimes that the medicine comes through really strongly with the communication.
Yeah, this is really interesting and I definitely want to focus more on Horsetail, in the future edition of this, because everything you've just said is fascinating from so many perspectives. First of all, Horsetail is an incredibly weird looking plant. I agree. It's incredibly old, right? It's from a almost different version of Earth. And what's interesting is, you talk about silicon, that it's kind of, some of these more silicon-based plants have given rise to hypotheses about silicon-based environments rather than carbon-based environments, right? And so what, we, as you said rightly, we're living in a world that is driven by Silicon Valley, by AI, by nanobot technology. This is not in the realm of conspiracy. It's all out there on mainstream media, if you still look at that stuff, and need to be convinced that that these ideas aren't conspiracy. But this technology has been around since the 90s and has been put into our bodies in various methods, particularly over the last couple of years. And so it's interesting for me, given what I know about the experimental injections and the effect that they can have on people in terms of removing things, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that that's probably a good place to leave that for the minute. But this is the work that people like me and you are now engaged in, right? Is talking to plants. And I agree with you. I'm finding that I'm needing to put less plants into my body because I can just work with the energy of them, and I don't need to have the things pass through my body. Everything is getting released a lot quicker because I don't have any desire to hold on to anything in my body. So there's not an awful lot to heal apart from just the emotional traumas of the last 2 years, which I think we're all dealing with. But at a physical level, I feel great. I still get, you know, the Epstein Barr gets triggered a little bit here and there. But I know what triggers it, and I know how to remove that stuff. And so I'm so in the space of my own body these days that the moment something starts to fill out, I'm on it, man. I'm checking, I'm opening a healing space for myself. I'm looking in to see what is the energy that is trying to get into my system to then manifest in my body. And so a lot of the work at the quantum level of healing and working with plant intelligence in particular is preventative. And I think that if we really get into this kind of preventative track of deciding what we allow, you know, and we could allow something like CV19 into our body if we perceive that there's a reason for it, or we say, no, I don't need to allow that in. Thanks, I'm already perfectly fine. You know, once we get to that place of realizing that, wow, you know, that's a game changer on so many levels, right? And, you know, this is where I think, you know, I'm certainly excited about the future of healthcare in this regard, and what this can mean for us. But, you know, the knock-on effects from this kind of understanding of working with intelligence in a quantum way with the higher mind space is, to me, is mind-blowing. And I know it is for you too, and hopefully many of our audience. And, you know, when we talk with the help of the sacred fungi or other medicines that can help us to do this, we get these incredibly, often quite short, right, but profound bits of information that we can sit with for days and weeks afterwards and understand on this kind of multi-dimensional, multi-layered approach that can be used at the micro and the macro level, right?
Yeah, that's certainly true. I'm experiencing more and more and more of that at the moment, and it's a very exciting journey indeed. Actually, I don't know what more to say about that right now, David. I'm sold on that idea. I know you had a lot to do with introducing me to that, although I was aware of it. I think one of the first herb classes I ever went to, there was a lady who was leading it, who was talking about a lot of this stuff, and I just remember sort of thinking that's kind of interesting, but I don't understand it. And there was nowhere to study it at the time, and I think that's something that's really opening. I have to say that with my students, so I have students on a degree level course in medical herbalism that I teach. They are so fascinated by it. You know, I have to be careful what I say, because I don't know enough to be able to teach them it or anything like that. But you know, occasionally I let something slip, and they instantly go for it. But I think that a lot of people called to study plant medicine, I prefer to call it plant medicine these days rather than herbal medicine. I don't know why, it just resonates better with me. Are people who are looking for that dimension as well. That's my very clear impression. I think that, I mean, I love our herbal medicine students. I think they're very special people, and the vast majority of them on the same page as you and I with regard to certain medications as well, which always helps.
That's so cool, you know, man. It's like, what's not cool about talking to plants, man? You know, it's like I've been doing it
Exactly.
since I was a teenager. There's certain plants I've been talking to, and they talk back, and I wouldn't be the person I am today without the help of one or two particular plants. And I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. Some of our audience will too. But it's, you know, when we come to that place of respect and co-creation with all plant beings, and we stop calling them drugs, which really gets on my nerves. You know, if you want to get drugs, guys, go to the local drugstore or the local pharmacy. That's where you'll find those things. If you want plant medicine, go out in the field and you'll find them, and you can pick them and you can eat them if you know what they are, and you can have amazing experiences, and you don't actually have to ask anybody or pay them anything either. You know, that's the beautiful thing about plant medicine, is it's everywhere. All you have to do is spend a little bit of time, get to know these beings, and give them your love and your respect, and man, you know, your whole life can be completely different, as I know you know all too well, and so do I. And you know, this is, I think that this is where we really start to evolve our understanding of the world that we live in, and also understand this incredible piece of quantum technology is our body, right? I'm just becoming so fascinated at the microscopic level of what goes on in this incredible piece of kit that, I've got to be honest, for 20 years I really didn't take a great deal of care of until my late 30s. And then And somebody sent a message up saying, hey man, like, you know, there's millions of us down here wondering where the captain is at the wheel of the ship, because it seems like he's not been present for a while and we need a bit of help down here. There's a bunch of stuff that needs looking at, you know. And so that was my journey into the body, like what, 6-7 years ago. And I've never stopped being fascinated by it. And I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't pay more attention to it earlier in my life. But, you know, we all have our journeys to go on, and I think it's super cool what you're doing with your students. And, you know, I am going to put in our show notes places that people can contact you. People, is there any particular website you'd like people to, you know, to check out more
Well,
of your work?
my own website, actually, which is thenaturalcentre.com. Yeah, and it's actually under construction. It's out there. You can get onto it, but it's under construction. We've got a shiny new website under construction as we speak. Should be ready around the end of this week, actually, hopefully, as we speak right now. But it's almost there. I was just putting the final touches to it earlier today with my IT technician, and I think he's almost ready to launch it. So I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be putting a lot of stuff on that. I'll put links to your stuff on, of course, as well, with your permission, of course.
Bless you, bro. Well, look, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your time with us today. I thoroughly enjoyed, as I always do, our chats, and look forward to future ones. Today was really just a kind of a reconnection with Web of Wyrd, to bring you into the show too. I think we've bounced around some interesting topics. Hopefully haven't offended too many people, but you know what, we're at a time when I think that we have to really be dialectic and critique what is being presented to us, and not just accept it as verbatim, because, you know, what is somebody else's truth and somebody else's set of facts doesn't necessarily resonate with me, and that's my privilege and my right as human being, as an individual, to say, hey man, you can keep your facts, they're for you, they don't work for me, and I'm going to work to a different set of principles. And as long as we're always in that place of love and our heart, and we're not trying to hurt or manipulate people, I think that, you know, we can't go too far wrong. So thank you, Pete, for your time, and I will put links to your website in the show notes, and I look forward to doing this again with you very, very soon. So thank you, Pete, for your time.
Thank you, Davyd. It's been a pleasure.
Bless you, bro. And so thank you to all of our audience out there, our listeners who have endured a very long, dry year without Web of Wyrd. We are sorry for that, for those people out there who've been missing the show. But we're back, and, you know, it feels important to be sharing this information about the plants and the natural kingdom right now, because we're in a time of great change. And I really firmly believe that the way forwards is going to come from Mother Earth for those of us that want to go down that path. So I wish you all a great week. I hope you're riding out the incredible energies off the back of the full moon and the spring equinox of this weekend just gone. And I look forward to welcoming you all to another edition of Web of Wyrd in the future. Take care, everybody, and see you next time.